Yeah, I don't know exactly why that did that, but yeah. All right. Trying to get started here. All right, tonight we're going to be looking at Matthew, chapter 24. We're going to be looking at some of the last verses in the chapter, Matthew chapter 24. And tonight we're going to be talking about the timing of the return of Christ and the society of that time. So Matthew chapter 24, and we're going to be looking at verses 36 and following. Let me get my place here. And so going back to last week, the last few studies, we examined the signs of the coming of Christ and what that event would entail. Tonight we examine the timing of the event, and in addition we'll look at some of the societal issues involved in the return of Christ, and we'll examine a couple of parables that Jesus gives demonstrating the importance of being prepared for the Lord's return. So as we finish this up tonight, we're going to look at especially the issue of, can we really know when the Lord is going to return? Is that even possible for us to know when Jesus will return? And so first and foremost, let's look at verse 36, and we'll ask someone if you'll read for us Matthew chapter 24, verse 36 for us. All right, Jesus uses a couple of terms here, hemera, which means day, and hour, which means, or hora, which means hour, and he's referring to a particular period of time. Sometimes in the Old Testament, the word day doesn't necessarily mean a 24-hour period. It can mean an era. Or for instance, like if we say the day of the Renaissance or something like that, we're talking about a period of time. Zephaniah and some of the prophets will use the day of the Lord in referencing a stage in the Lord's stage in the history of the earth. So this seems to be what he's talking about here. Maybe a lot of different events coming together. But Jesus also provides a bizarre statement. He even denotes that no one except the Father alone knows the time when Christ will return. So if this is the case, can anyone know the exact coming of Jesus Christ? Can anyone pinpoint the exact time when the rapture is going to take place or when Christ is going to return? He says not even the angels in heaven nor Jesus himself knows when this, only the Father. So can anybody else really know the exact timing of his return? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, and this brings up a very peculiar situation here. Some have posed the question, if Jesus is divine, which the Bible clearly shows that he is, how is it that he doesn't know when the end will be? And there are several different opinions as to how this may be or why this may be. Some feel that it may have been that Jesus didn't know certain things while on earth, thus helping him to serve as a perfect example of faith. So it may be when he came to earth that some things were hidden from his knowledge. I mean, for instance, you have the situation where he's walking, remember the story, where he's walking down the road and a lady touches the hem of his garment and he feels power going out, and he asks the question, who was it that touched? Now, he may have known, but it seems like he didn't from the way this is saying. So others feel that there may be certain things that the Father knows that other members of the Trinity don't know, and that could be the case as well. But either way, the absence of knowledge does not indicate a lack of divinity on Jesus' part. In fact, Jesus states in John 10:30, I and the Father are one. So this would obviously indicate that this information was hidden from Jesus at the time, at least when he gave this information. But what this really should show is the absolute foolishness when you see someone who writes a book, or when you see someone who goes on television, tries to indicate that they know the exact timing of Jesus' return. It's absolutely impossible. I mean, if the angels in heaven don't know, and if Jesus don't know, certainly no one on earth could know. So let me ask you a question here. How should a Christian handle claims that Christ is returning in a particular point in time? If you hear someone on television, or or if you hear someone come up to you and say, I know the exact time when Jesus is going to return, what should we do as Christians, or how should we respond to that? Absolutely. And it's hard to argue with that, you know.
John said even if something doesn't get it, actually trying to get it right.
That's very well possible. Just delay it 30 more minutes just to prove that person wrong. Oh, you just stole the rest of the lesson. And that's true. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not in the second half of this discussion here. I'm not condemning John Hagee, but I do think it's a little bit odd here. John Hagee recently wrote a book titled The Four Blood Moons, claiming that the four blood moons, in other words, the lunar eclipses that are taking place, the last one's supposed to be at the end of 2015, were indicative of certain events in Israel. Now, that could be the case. I'm not arguing that may not be the case, but in some of his messages, he's even seemed to indicate that at the end of these four blood moons, Christ would return. Now, he hasn't said that explicitly, but he's tended to indicate that Christ could return at the end of these four blood moons. Another good example here, and even perhaps a better example, is one Harold Camping, who claimed that Jesus would return to earth on May 21st, 2011. So, what are your thoughts concerning this in relation to what we've read, and what do you think this says about individuals who try to make such claims? What do you think that says?
Human plan is something that they don't even grasp.
Well said.
They're just trying to control it. And they haven't controlled it. So they want to try to come up with something that they can twist to sound like it makes sense.
That's a very good point, because we want to know. We want to know all the details of what's...
Someone who is afraid of people who are searching.
Yeah.
And know like some of the televangelists. Isn't that $50 donation from the church out? Giving somebody that false hopes that there's a clean people adds to the following. False hope. He doesn't look like Michael. Oh, I shouldn't say that. They're crazy.
But you know, the minister can get up and tell you that the world's coming to an end. Maybe he's saying, you know, the congregation out there that's not being saved, this is the time we need to get you to be saved, and you don't know it.
Well, that's a good point, too.
So, you know, you can't. I listened to John Hagee, and I heard the Lord well, and he makes you stop and say, yes, am I doing it? Is my life right? Am I doing the right thing? So maybe he's bringing more people to Christ.
And that's a good point. And, you know, and I got a lot of respect for John Hagee. I don't necessarily agree with his four blood moons, but, you know, let's be honest, there's a lot of ministers on TV I don't agree
A lot of
with.
times say four blood moon, I don't see four moon. Never see it. But as a Christian, you know, God is right, and you hopefully do everything else. But to a sinner, he's speaking to that sinner, and listening to you.
And you stole the rest of the lesson, too.
I listen to all those people. I try to tell people, if you're not righteous, you need to get righteous. Yeah. I got labels on the Lord, and that's not really well, I picture this big dove coming out with this lady sitting on it. They don't want to go. Well, this is just like the couple what's going on the rack.
Well said. Well said. I think I can be a little bit cynical sometimes, and I've talked to Faith about this. Sometimes I think in certain individuals, sometimes, especially televangelists, I believe sometimes they'll use it to try to sell books. to be honest with you. I think some of them have good purposes behind it, I really do. But the cynical side of me say, maybe some people come up with certain things to try to sell books. Maybe not, I don't know. But it seems like that may be the case with some. But we'll just have to be the judge on that. Or ultimately, God will. That's the most important thing. All right, someone, if you will, we're going to get into some more lengthy passages of Scripture now. Someone, if you will, read verses 37 through 42. Okay, so this kind of goes right in with what Janice and Philip were saying about the importance of being ready and warning other people that they need to be ready, because Jesus says that in the end, whenever these things do take place, and notice he says on the one hand he doesn't know the exact timing, at least while he was on earth, but he knows the situations that's going to be taking place when the time is getting ready to happen. So. He says, just as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. In other words, think back to Noah's Ark. I mean, the Bible tells us you have Noah, and at this point in time, the Bible seems to indicate that it had never rained. So Noah knew what it was like, at least in this area, for it to rain. And all of a sudden, Noah's coming and saying, hey, listen, it's going to rain, and this place is going to be flooded, because God's bringing judgment to this area. Now, do you think they looked at him as if he had two heads, just as if he was a little bit on the crazy side? And obviously, I mean, there's a lot of similarities with the end time civilization, the end time society, and the society of Noah's day. First of all, Jesus indicates that when the end will happen, just like the days of Noah, you're going to have people who are busy with their lives. For instance, look back. He says that people will be eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until Noah entered the ark. So, people are going to be very busy with their lives. I mean, are people busy with their lives today? And let's be honest, if I can just be completely honest, sometimes people can kind of be self-obsessed, and I'm guilty of this. I'll be the first to admit I'm guilty of this. Like on social media, we'll say, well, hey, I had this for breakfast, or I had that for lunch, or I did this or did that. And I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but I think what it does show, or the invention of the selfie, where you take a picture of yourself and post it and plaster it for everybody to see, it just kind of seems to show how self-obsessed we are. And again, I'm just as guilty as anyone else. Well, I think that's what Jesus is kind of showing here, that people are busy with their lives. They're not taking time to consider the end times. And so that's why it's important for us as Christians, just as Noah was doing in this day and time, to remind folks, hey, there's something bigger than you out there, and there's coming an end eventually. You need to be ready, be prepared for the coming of the Son of God. They were also theologically unconcerned. People will be as unconcerned with the things of the Lord in the end times, just as unbelievers were unconcerned with the flood in Noah's day. They'll see God's faithful as bizarre or even crazy. I mean, how do you picture people seeing Noah? Do you see them seeing him as a sane, rational man? No. Well, like Noah, God's people, they'll warn the unbelievers in the end times, but blindness will captivate and capture the unbelievers' eyes, unfortunately. So, what similarities do you find between Jesus' description of the end times and the times of Noah with our modern times? Do you see any parallels or any connection between these two descriptions?
everybody getting around what they're doing, calling away. I had a thought about over 34 seconds behind it.
Oh, you know, that's right.
One about the man who's predicting after the 4 reverends. You know, if he's presented it on how he said it, he says, I don't know when it's going to happen. I'm just saying the signs are right. You know, maybe he could be a little more superficial.
That's possible. And you know, and sometimes the way he presents it, it seems like he's talking about that something could happen with Israel, and that's a possibility. I mean, it could happen. And I think some of the things he says is interesting, but I don't know that it automatically indicates that Jesus is coming right after the 4 blood moons. And if that's what he's indicating, I think there's a little bit of a problem there. But it may just be meaning that he thinks that there's something happening with Israel. But there again, he sets himself up at the end of 2015 as to whether or not it's going to be the case. And
But the comparison too, you know, you're asking people talk all the crazy, and it's crazy. It didn't even rain, let alone they weren't anywhere near any water. He's building a big boat. You know, when he's preaching and times are coming, everything's gonna end. You know, it and us, and times are coming, it's gonna end. People look up to us as crazy. And then the other ones who don't, well, I'm a part of my friends in hell, you know, I mean, they think it's a big joke.
yeah.
So we look at it like we're crazy.
I mean, you even have people today. I mean, there's absolutely no substance to it whatsoever. But you have people running so hard from God that they try to claim that Jesus never even existed. I mean, you have people out there saying that. And historically, I mean, you ask any legitimate historian, they will tell you they are just flat crazy because there's tons of evidence that Jesus existed, and really tons of evidence to suggest that he did exactly what the Bible suggests that he did. But you're right, there's a lot of people out there who just don't want it to be the case.
The worst part of it is, you get that more out there open right now. And anybody in the community, whether it's someone that goes to church here or not, walks in and says, God just told me that the end of the world's coming. And, it's either with flood or earthquake or whatever it is, we all need to go down here to a bomb shelter, or he told us that we need to go to Mark. First of all, we don't have to listen after Mark. We're not going to listen because we just he's crazy. A lot of people thought Carl was crazy. How many people are going to listen to just the average person walking in? I find it very hard to believe, someone, oh, they're not going to say, well, show me, we're true.
Yeah.
Private say so, can't really be. It's just like to have crazy people think the person is walking in here. Now imagine if you live in the desert and they get ready to tell you it's going to flood. Now, around here, we can almost hear the flood. Over here, we're always seeing it get out from earthquakes, tremors and stuff, this and that. Not take somebody serious like that. That's a lot of faith.
And the picture I kind of get of this day and time of Noah's day is that it may have been, I can't prove this and I may be wrong, but the image I kind of get is maybe it was kind of a dry area. And then here he comes saying, hey, it's going to flood, there's going to be tons of water here. And it's like, huh? What's that guy smoking? What's wrong with him,
But you look at this, like the kids will be like this, when you do the water, and the grace,
Right. Yeah, that's true.
I mean, I just some kids and I was like,
It didn't just rain, water everywhere.
Yeah, right. Top down, bottom up. That's right. It can't. That's a good point.
but
That's,
the God, the thing of God is, He furnished everything for these people up until this very time. And this, all of that was God's plan. But everything God's plan is good.
you see kind of a pattern. Seems like this always happens where when times are bad, people start depending on God. But when God starts blessing and times get good, and people start enjoying the blessings, it seems like they start drifting backwards, drifting away for some reason. It seemed like I read before the Great Depression that church attendance had kind of dropped off a little. But then during the times of the Great Depression and thereafter, I mean, everybody was flocking to the church. And, you know, like you said, Old Testament times is the same way. It seems like when things are going good, you know, people want to step back and do it their way. And then when things are going bad, it's like, help me, help me, help me, you know. Sometimes we got to rattle our chains to get our attention, it seems like. Let's go. Okay, now verses 43 and 44. If someone would read that for us as we look at the parable of the householder. Has anyone ever had someone break into your house or break into a building or steal something from you on one of your properties? Y'all have? I've been lucky and blessed so far, knock on wood, to not have this happen, but my dad had something stolen from him in one of his buildings. And I don't know, I've heard people say that when it happens, you feel vulnerable, you know, and you know, of course you're victimized after something like that happens. And Jesus indicates that, well, let me just give you a case in point. If you knew who it was that was breaking in your house or breaking in or stole whatever, and you could be there and you could plan for it, would you? And it may not have been pretty when the guy broke in, you know, or whoever it was. So what Jesus is saying in this parable or illustration is that if a homeowner knows someone's going to break into his house and is able to prepare for it, of course he's going to be ready. And so Jesus demonstrates in like manner that we need to be prepared. We may not know exactly when it's coming, but we do know that it is going to happen. And so the Christian can be prepared by watching for the signs of the times. Now, you know, with this, I don't think, as we said before, I think there's two great dangers. I don't think we need to dwell on it all the time in saying that, you know, making it an obsession by any means, but at the same time, we don't need to just forget about it either. We need to keep living our lives preparing, for the end, and in many ways to prepare our hearts, to prepare our lives. You know, just thinking to ourselves, you know, if Christ came right now, whatever we're doing, wherever we are, would He be pleased with what I'm doing? And boy, I'm telling you, that is a big good test for us, you know, in anything we do. If He came right now, would He be pleased with what I'm doing? Someone read for us, if you will, verses 45 through verse 51.
Blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with the drunken. The Lord of that servant shall come in a day, and he liveth not him, and in an hour that he is not aware of, and shall cut him asunder, and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Okay, chapter 24 concludes with the parable of the wicked servant. Now, in Jesus' parables, what he tends to do is he tends to take 2 or 3 or 4 stories, a lot of times there are 3 parables, and kind of interlock them together to present a grand, big sermon. Kind of like a lot of preachers will preach 3-point messages, give a poem and a prayer. Jesus would give sometimes 3 parables, and these parables would build upon one another. Now, coming up next week, we're going to read one of my favorite parables in the Bible. My most favorite parable, and some people don't even call it a parable, is the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. That's probably my favorite of all. But my next favorite is the parable of the 10 virgins, I think, because this is a very interesting parable because it shows the preparedness that we need to have. And there's a lot of symbolism in this that we'll look at pertaining to the oil. And so we'll look at that next week. But in this parable, he shows, in the parable of the wicked servant, he shows the importance of being ready. In the parable of the 10 virgins, he shows the importance of having a sound relationship with Christ. And that's kind of related in this parable as well. But the final parable, the parable of the talents, which will be week after next, demonstrates the importance of us in faith to use the gifts that we've been given up until the time of the Lord's return. So we've got 2 very powerful parables coming in the next couple of weeks. But in this parable, the parable of the wicked servant, Jesus does not only reference Christians as servants, but many commentators believe that he references every person because if you think about it, under God, we're all his servants, whether we realize it or not. As Janice says, everything is according to the plan of God. In fact, we're all servants to him, whether one acknowledges that fact or not. The blessed servant is one who has come to terms with God in Christ and has entered into a personal relationship with God and is also found serving the Lord. Well, let's be honest. If we know and understand how much God has done for us, we should want to serve him. It shouldn't be laborious to us. We should desire to serve him. The wicked servant is one who denies the Lord's return or expects it to be greatly delayed. In other words, says, they either say he's not coming or they say, hey, he's going to be so far off, we don't need to even worry about it. And they end up finding themselves in acts of violence, drunkenness, and the like. So in other words, they become, as Faith was talking about, party people, interested in the party or are interested in different things and not interested in the things of the Lord. And so Jesus points out that when the day of the Lord occurs, such a person is going to be found in great trouble. Can you imagine the expressions on people's face who've been told over and over and over again, prepare to meet your Lord, prepare, Jesus is coming back. Can you imagine the look on their faces when he does come back? I mean, can you imagine? And I hate to even fathom, what's in store for a person like that. So Jesus points out that when the day of the Lord does occur, such a person will be found in great trouble. And notice he says, in that place will be weeping, of course, lots of tears, and gnashing of teeth. That's gritting one's teeth severely. So in this study, we found that the unbeliever is distracted away from concern about God in the end times. What are some reasons and what are some distractions that one may not want to come to Christ? What are some things? Now, obviously, God is the one who brings us to faith, but what are some things, what are some excuses that people give as to not want to come to salvation? What are some things that hinder people? Hypocrites? Well, that's a good point. Christian hypocrites,
People will live by their
Yeah, dead on the moon. And peer pressure is a very strong influence on people.
so tied up, so enjoying it, so strong in their way of living. So the choice and they don't want to give it up.
Yeah. That's a good point too. Mm-hmm. Put it off another year or two. Or some people think maybe I can have a deathbed conversion. You know, problem is you don't know how you're going to go out. You know.
You feel like if you can get them here and get them started, you can make it realize it's hard to get that first step in the way.
Right.
They see it as another thing in their life. It's 11 o'clock, I better be there, and then I get up, have a big rest, have a breakfast, like that. They see it just like going to work or going to the grocery store. It's a chore or something.
Yeah, I just say that's my only day off.
That's my own.
Mhm.
I should do something I want to do. Well, that should be something you want to do, you know. They see it not as what it is, but just as a normal, regular chore. Somewhere else they gotta go. I'll take them to get some baseball. You know, it's something they have to do, but they're, again, they don't have to do it. They have to do a lot of other things. So this one they don't have to, so they can slip and slide on that one and not do it.
Well, you can have a for I can be Christian.
The question I have on that is, if you're a Christian, why wouldn't you want to be in church? You know, because if you're, and because if you really are a Christian, why wouldn't you want to be in church? Because you'll be with God's people. And you're talking about peer pressure. I think that's even more a reason why a person needs to be in church, to be around God's people. Because if you're out and about, surrounded by people who don't believe, you need that connection with believers to strengthen yourself for the week ahead.
It's got to be in your heart.
Right. That's right.
Not only kind of bed scripture, some of it, encouraging each other up. Some of these young discouraged.
Mhm.
Sometimes we just need somebody to listen. I'm not saying that. And pray for them, love them, be in the way. Sometimes that's all it takes to help hurt somebody. Sometimes you just need a word of encouragement. And you don't listen. You can finish. Whatever. Not part of it. I've been sick on Sunday, and through the whole week, I go to church.
We've also got that lack of nurturing. We got kids that grow up here in church, and you can tell the difference between them and home. The reason a lot of our society is the way it is because fewer and fewer people go to church. They're not raised in that environment. They don't understand that this is not tolerated, and it's not acceptable. And outside of church, they do what they want to do. Over here we'll say, no, you're not supposed to do that. But if you hear, no, you're not supposed to do that, no, you're not supposed to do that, no, 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 you eventually, your ethics and your morality will go over here. No, I'm not supposed to break into people's houses and do drugs. But if you're over here, well, this is what you're going to do, what you're going to do, what you're going to do. That's what you set your values as. And that's why the society is in the position it's in now, because so few people hear what you shouldn't do, what you should do correctly, these four laws, compared to out there, where it's do whatever you want to do.
You know, and something in relation to that, you know, kind of combining a couple of things that were said earlier, you know, Ruth Ann was saying about it's hard to get people in the church, and you were talking about some ways of, you know, showing people right from wrong. One thing that is a good way to share the gospel is basically by what they call servant evangelism, doing deeds of kindness to random people, you know, and kind of sneak in that you're a Christian, you know, maybe how the Lord has blessed you, and just plant a seed there, just to get them thinking about that. And you know, because Christ has demonstrated his love for us. I think that's what it was talking about when we were talking this past Sunday about hospitality, just doing random acts of kindness for people out on the street. And man, that says volumes. Talking about, we were talking before, I was about a situation where I come up to a police officer and thanked him. And he looked at me, his eyes got big, and he looked at me again, it could just be a simple word of encouragement to somebody, or maybe buying someone a cup of coffee or something like that.
You have to joke, as a teenager, you would be wanting to your job. You decided to go to morning, your parents would, get up from your church. Let me still live on the other side, so I got church and when you come, you give me that. You give me that, when you will start thinking, and then they were married to someone, the church was important, and those of you that you
Yeah, I wasn't given an option. Grandpa was a pastor. I wasn't given an option.
The
Back
sad
when,
part today is you see that kind of thing. I have a 3-year-old in my class who lives in the house. He will out. It's sad. Yeah. Thinking that, he knows he don't go in my classroom.
yeah.
He tried that and he didn't quit. But he gets away with it at home, and he's got 2 older siblings that are middle school and high school. But, a lot of times, they're not starting with them young. I heard of advertising on a Christian radio station. Mailman came to the door to deliver a package. Johnny's out playing in the street. Oh, he's doing something. Why don't you go back and get on the street? Well, I don't interfere with him. He does his own thing. I let him be creative. You can't play in the middle of the street.
No.
Huh?
Good night.
I hear about how the kids and weren't you church, want to get together, or beat your butt up, or you're supposed to go. That's what it's about. You're supposed to go.
Right.
And then you have your children, you will get there. And that's why we don't have enough Christians around. Kids are not support, and
That brought up, I hadn't even thought about this, but that brought up a study I heard Greg Koppel give one time, and he said that there was a study that I think it was Notre Dame or something like that did it, and I may be wrong on that, but it was saying that they weren't looking at the kids who left church, they were looking at the kids who did go to church. And when both parents placed a good importance on the church, or strong importance on their being in church, there was a 99% chance that child was going to stay in church even after leaving college. So I think that is a huge issue right there. I think y'all brought out, placing emphasis on church, saying, hey, you need to be in church, and I think it carries over to the next generation.
Yeah, but if I didn't, let's say, I didn't go to church, I still go to church when I was 50 years old, but then I didn't go back to church up until, I had a family and all that. Well, I never had a Christmas.
That's right.
Well, I fuss at my nephew now, he's 52. And I said, you get your blood up, you get to church. And my brother said, yeah, get up there. I said, yeah. Now, I don't have that much say in their lives, but I can tell them.
Right.
And they do listen sometimes.
You never know what type of impact that's going to have on somebody. So we obviously got to put a great importance. If we expect our kids and the next generation to place an importance on God in the church, we definitely need to put importance. And I think that basically answers the second question there regarding the distractions. I think it is important to have a focus on the Lord in His church. And so in conclusion tonight, it's impossible for any of us to know exactly when Christ will return, at least while we're on earth. Now, maybe when we're in heaven, maybe God's going to give us some type of knowledge. Who knows? Maybe He will, maybe He won't. I don't think at that point in time, as John said before, we may not even care at that point. We're in heaven, So, but any attempt to set a date for the return of Christ should be rejected. In fact, let's be honest, this is kind of embarrassing. I mean, because every few years you have someone saying, Christ is going to return such and such year, or he's going to return, that day comes, that day passes. Another person says, Christ is going to return, that day comes, that day passes. And I think that kind of fuels the fire for people who say, well, he's never going to come, you know. They keep getting it wrong. So I think it's important for us to get away from date setting. And so while it's important to know, while it's impossible for us to know the exact time of Christ's return, the Christian should not be found to become lazy in thinking that such a time will never occur. So in other words, the core message tonight is to prepare ourselves when may we all find ourselves in Christ being faithful servants at the moment that he arrives. So next week we're going to look at the parable of the 10 virgins. I'm looking forward to this. This is one of my favorite parables in the Bible, and I really like this. We're going to do some biblical backgrounds, looking a little bit at marriage and the marriage ceremony next week. Any other comments, questions before we close? Again, this is kind of a test run on both means. I know on my internet radio show I can get this downloaded. Hopefully I can get the video downloaded. And so if it's all successful, I'll provide you some links and let you know where we can find this lesson online. If there's nothing else, I'm going to ask Brother David if you would close us with a word of prayer.